Good morning, everyone. Apologies for the delay. Thank you so much for joining us at our 14th annual VECAN conference. It is a beautiful sunny Saturday. While I wish we were together in person, I'm so glad you've joined this morning, and more so really grateful for your partnership in our collective work to build a more just, clean energy economy in the state of Vermont. Again, Johanna Miller, Energy and Climate Program Director at the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I also helped to coordinate the Vermont Energy and Climate Action Network, the hosts of this event. That's the network of many of you all, the network of all volunteer town energy committees and partners, including Vital Communities, Vermont Council on Rural Development, the Energy Action Network, and Efficiency Vermont. So we have a great day ahead of us and a great week ahead of us as well. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the stage over for our opening panel. But before that, I just wanted to say a few things and then give you a sense of the day and the week ahead. So I'm going to be brief because this day is all about framing where we are in this moment and thinking about the work ahead. But really, this is an incredible moment in time. I mean, we know that our world is warming. We're feeling the consequences of that change right here in Vermont. Our communities are feeling it. People are feeling it. And, you know, Vermonters and people across this planet are really, feeling the consequences of this changing climate. And people are feeling those changes differently. So we know that our current system is deeply inequitable, and we have an obligation and also a tremendous opportunity to do things differently, centering the voices of historically marginalized communities in the solutions that we must advance. And that's the work before us today, the conversation that we're going to have, the week ahead, and the months and the years ahead as well. So we really are at an incredible moment in time, and you're going to hear a lot about it this morning. Hot off the presses, we have the first ever statutorily required climate action plan. We have an unparalleled influx of federal dollars, and we have, you all and Vermonters who are so interested in and supportive of us making this just transition. So that's, again, the work that we're going to dig in today into this week and over the coming years. So what can we expect today? First, in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over for our panel overviewing federal, state, and local climate action. Then we're going to take a 10-minute break at 10:30 and come back at 10:40 for some really inspiring community-led climate innovation success stories. After that, we're going to break into some small groups that are going to go into more depth about what we have heard today, what you are doing in your communities, what you would like to do, what the opportunities that you see, we collectively see before us, and then roll up our sleeves and sort of think about how we can advance those priorities together. So that's a really exciting day. But before we start, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors for helping make this conference and this work possible. There are too many to mention, but please find them on our website, on the PowerPoint that you will see throughout the day. And you can also check them out in the resource provider guide that you'll receive after this event. And we really encourage you to lean into these partners in this essential work. I mean, we have an unparalleled sort of network of people and partners in the state of Vermont to do this important work. So, and you'll see that resource guide that was put together by my colleague, Becca Custer. And I really want to give Becca a huge shout out for making so much of this virtual event possible. So thank you, Becca. And Becca, bless her heart, if you're having any problems connecting or need help troubleshooting and anything, you can join Becca in the help desk as well. So that's just a few of the logistics. And I don't want to take any more time before I turn it over to my colleague, Lauren Hierl, Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters, who's going to facilitate this panel that really is focused in on, grounding us on what this new climate action plan means. You'll hear from Jared Duvall, the Energy Action Network, and then we are also very honored to have Senate President Pro Tem, Senator Becca Balint, with us, who will overview what we can anticipate potentially this legislative session. And then we're very lucky to have Senator Bernie Sanders, two folks from Senator Bernie Sanders' team, Camila Thorndike and Ethan Hinch, with us as well. So Lauren, I'm going to turn it over to you to facilitate this really exciting panel, and very much look forward to hearing what folks have to say. Thanks.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Maybe someone put in the chat if you're having issues, but I'll just get going. So it is so great to be with you all. I wish we were together in person. This is always such a fun event when we can get all that energy from each other, but we'll make the most of it, and we've got a great session planned for you. So again, my name is Lauren Hierl, and I'm the Executive Director of Vermont Conservation Voters, and VCV is an organization that works to advocate for strong environmental laws, help elect pro-environment lawmakers, and hold lawmakers accountable for their actions once in office. And I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined today by a set of amazing panelists, and we have a ton of information to share with you today. First, we're going to be hearing from Jared Duvall, who's the Executive Director of the Energy Action Network and a leader on the Vermont Climate Council. And Jared's going to provide a high-level overview of the hot off the presses initial Vermont Climate Action Plan. Next, we'll hear from Senate President Pro Tem Becca Balint, who has been a climate champion in her time in the Vermont Senate, and she will give her insights on what we might expect in the 2022 legislative session. Then we'll get an update from Camila Thorndike and Ethan Hinch from Senator Sanders' office, so we can better understand what Vermont can expect from the climate components of the recently passed infrastructure bill and hopefully the soon-to-be-passed Build Back Better Act. And Senator Sanders, of course, has been at the heart of these negotiations as chair of the Senate Budget Committee and has been a staunch ally for climate action. So we're really grateful to have some folks from his team joining us today. We're aiming to have time for Q&A at the end, so please put your questions in the comment box as we go. I know you all will have a lot of great questions, so we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. And now, before I turn it over to Jared, I just wanted to take a moment to set the stage a little for our conversation this morning. Like many of you, I've been coming to the VECAN conference for many years, and sometimes through the years, these policy updates and looks ahead can start to feel a little bit like Groundhog Day. But I think we have actually arrived at a new moment that's giving me a lot of hope and optimism, and I hope that you will leave this panel today feeling similarly inspired. I know that can feel a little strange as we're still in the midst of this really tough time with the ongoing pandemic and so many systemic and political challenges that can often feel overwhelming and insurmountable. But I think we really are at a moment of unique opportunity for change. And a lot of the credit for that goes to many people in this virtual room with us who for years have showed up to lobby days, contacted legislators, run for office yourself, wrote letters to the editor, gotten clean energy projects done in your community, and stepped up to fight for enactment of the Global Warming Solutions Act, even after it was vetoed by the governor. So due in large part to so much hard work and activism, we now have a confluence of factors that have set us up for bolder and more equitable climate action than we've ever had before. For the first time in 15 years, we have an open congressional seat without an incumbent running, which gives us the chance to ensure that a mandate for ambitious climate action is front and center in election season in the year to come. For the first time ever, our state government was required to focus an incredible amount of resources on developing a mandatory climate action plan, which has legally binding pollution reduction targets and equity and resilience goals. For the first time ever, we have unprecedented levels of federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and hopefully soon the Build Back Better Act, which will help enable and accelerate the transition to clean energy. Well, I know it can be easy to get fixated on our global or federal or local shortcomings on climate action. I'm feeling really optimistic that together we can take our collective energy, expertise, urgency, and shared understanding of the opportunities inherent in climate action, and together we can make the most of this never before seen momentum to really transform how Vermonters get around, heat and power our homes and businesses, and help everyone benefit from the transition to clean energy. Every single day, I look at my 10 and 7-year-old and think about what kind of world they'll have in 20 or 50 years. And it's a constant reminder that we simply can't move boldly or quickly enough. I'm excited by the opportunities in front of us, and I know with the power of your voices and building on the amazing work you're doing in your local communities, we can make the most of it. So with that, let's hear from our panelists. First up is Jared Duvall, Executive Director of the Energy Action Network, which of course is an organization we've all come to rely on for their invaluable analyses of where we are and what we need to do on climate, and for their important networking role. Jared's also the co-chair of the Climate Council's Science and Data Subcommittee and a member of the Climate Council's Steering Committee. Jared, take it away.
Thank you, Lauren. What an awesome introduction. Such great context setting that you provided there. I just want to start by thanking you and Joey and Becca and the whole VECAN team. It's just really exciting to be with you all again, and all the VECAN members and the grassroots leaders and energy committee leaders across the state. And it's a real honor to join the fellow panelists who will speak shortly. I just want to note, I'm wearing kind of two hats, and I want to be clear about, what I'm speaking about today, or the position I'm speaking from, and that is primarily as a member of the Climate Council, because most of you who are aware of Energy Action Network know that we are a neutral convener, nonpartisan. We do not do any lobbying. We are just the facts, please, the evidence and data tracking and analysis. So as an organization, EAN does not lobby for or against policies, and as a network, we don't take positions on policies. Of course, individual network members are free to, but as a member of the Climate Council, of course, I and other counselors do have to take those positions, and I'm going to talk about some of those policies today. So I want to be clear up front that I am speaking in this presentation as a member of the Climate Council. So let's just start with the context. Folks who I think I've done an introduction at the VECAN conference. I've been really lucky to do that the last few years, and as those who've seen those know, I always start with the science. And we know, thanks to the incredible work of the global scientific community, the scientific consensus that has been shared by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, that we have less than a decade to cut our greenhouse gas pollution in half if we are going to avoid the worst impacts, avoid that 2-degree threshold beyond which some really unimaginable tipping points and feedback loops in terms of even more extreme weather and significant sea level rise and other impacts are projected. And here in Vermont, we have a role. This is a global effort. And we first passed as a state greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals in statute in 2007. But unfortunately, they were just that, goals. And there wasn't enough behind them to actually ensure that we would meet those pollution reduction targets. And so every year for about 13 years, we would blow by our pollution reduction goals, seeing for most of that period, greenhouse gas emissions increasing. One of the big reasons is that we have not yet had, I would say until this climate action plan, a truly comprehensive approach to the climate action and our energy future. We have had great policies in the past, of course, that can always be improved upon, but the focus in Vermont over the last decade plus had primarily just been on efficiency in the electricity sector. And now I think we're finally rounding that out with a fuller, more robust framework to give us tools to help reduce pollution and reduce costs in our two highest polluting, highest cost sectors, which are transportation and heating. We know that no state, no country, no matter how small or big, can solve the climate crisis alone. But we also know that we have a moral responsibility and just a basic responsibility in terms of the math of collective action, that we all have to do our part. And I would argue that Vermonters and Americans have even more of a responsibility because historically we have used a lot more fossil fuels per capita than a lot of the countries that are currently bearing and are likely to bear even worse effects from the climate crisis than we will. So this has been a pretty momentous week. The climate action plan, the initial climate action plan passed this Wednesday on a vote of 19-4 by the Climate Council. And it's really our first comprehensive, serious plan that has some teeth, has some real policy solutions to help us get on track and really do our part. I see it as a significant first step, a really strong foundation to build on. Of course, there is more that we need to do, both process-wise and in terms of the substance of the recommendations of the plan, but this is a really strong start, and I'm just incredibly humbled and grateful to have been part of it with so many of you who've contributed either directly on subcommittees or as making public comment or contributing to public conversation or analysis. This has been an amazing statewide collective effort of outpouring of real, just, heart and deep commitment. And, what is the Climate Action Plan? It is a nearly 300-page document, very thorough, that from the beginning has been designed and has ended up designed not only to cut climate pollution and do our part to reduce our emissions, but to ensure that we do so in an equitable way, an equitable transition that will save Vermonters money. Most importantly, the Vermonters who can least afford the high cost of fossil energy and the high cost of our climate impacts, and begin to keep more of our energy dollars local by investing in weatherization, investing in moving beyond 100% imported fossil fuel, using more of our local and clean electricity, and strengthening our economy in a virtuous feedback loop that keeps dollars local and helps create local jobs, and helping crucially prepare our communities for extreme weather and other anticipated climate impacts. I think a lot of the headlines have focused on the pollution reduction strategies of the plan and requirement of the Global Warming Solutions Act. But the Climate Council is also charged with, and the Climate Action Plan also includes a number of really important strategies around resilience and adaptation and strategies for how we can make sure that our communities are as prepared as possible as we move forward. So let me move to the next slide. Just folks, I think, are familiar with this. This just helps set the context of what our historic emissions have been and where we stand as of the latest data in 2018, 8.64 million metric tons. And then these three green dots show the emissions levels we are now legally required to get to by 2025, 2030, and 2050. You can see the emissions that come from each sector by color here, with transportation in the green, thermal energy in the orange. And actually an easier way to see it is looking right here, this bar graph showing, the share of emissions that come from different sectors, with transportation there on the far left and building thermal, the next highest bar, together responsible for about 3/4 of Vermont's climate pollution. So what is in the plan? It is organized into 5 impact areas. I only have 15 minutes. I don't have, I think I would need 15 hours to begin to go through an overview of everything that's in the plan. As I mentioned, it's nearly 300 pages. I encourage you to look at it. There's also a really helpful summary of it that you can look at. I have links to that at the end. But broadly speaking, it's about cutting our climate pollution, resilient working in natural lands, our vital communities, capturing carbon, and cross-cutting solutions, because a lot of the solutions go across each of those 4 previously mentioned areas. Throughout, we have prioritized and done and worked to really center these guiding principles that were developed by the Just Transitions Subcommittee of the Climate Council. We have not always met the mark. We have been challenged by a short timeline and by trying to do this work in the midst of a pandemic. But we know we have a lot more work to do going forward to increase our public engagement efforts and really make sure that we're centering and advancing these principles, not just on the kind of substantive recommendations, but also from a process perspective. So in terms of, I'm just going to highlight a few key things because I don't have a lot of time, but in terms of the 2 highest impact recommendations that folks should be aware of in terms of pollution reduction, Those are implementing a clean heat standard, which would be designed to achieve the heating sector's share of pollution reduction, so 34% of the total of what we need for emissions reduction by 2030. It would put an obligation on fossil fuel suppliers of heating oil, propane, natural gas, and make sure that they are purchasing clean heat credits to a level that will achieve our emissions reduction, which means investing in things like weatherization for low and moderate income homes, low-cost clean heat solutions like heat pumps, and advanced wood heating, efficient stoves, etc. The second largest in terms of recommendation in terms of emissions reduction possibility is to join the Transportation and Climate Initiative program. For folks who've been following the news recently, you're probably aware that Massachusetts and Connecticut recently have pulled back from TCIP. This happened very late in the process for the Climate Action Plan, and our response was to say, we're still in on the Transportation and Climate Initiative if other states come back to the table, or if new states like New York join, which has also been considering joining. TCIP, the Transportation and Climate Initiative program, is crucially important because without it, the plan simply will not add up unless and until we add new strategies that are not yet in there to make up for any potential gap. We're going to do that work in the next few months to identify those alternatives. And they're not mutually exclusive. Some of these could be complementary and they may be pursued even if we do move forward with TCIP. But just quickly, I'll just highlight them now and we'll probably get more into them in the Q&A. But some of the things we anticipate looking at are the possibility of a clean transportation standard, which has worked successfully in a number of other states, potentially joining our neighbors to the north in Quebec and California in their cap and invest program called the Western Climate Initiative, and also considering a very strong true cost pricing or vehicle efficiency price adjustment program. So that's some on transportation. The other two I really want to mention that are just of high importance for emissions reduction. There's a number of other things. This is by no means comprehensive. I'm just lifting up a few things right now. One is weatherization at scale, which is investing in weatherizing the homes and apartments of 90,000 low and moderate income Vermonters over the next decade, which provides a win-win-win in terms of cost savings, health benefits, and pollution reduction. And then crucially, also joining with California and New York that have already passed and are in the process of rulemaking for what's called the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, also Advanced Clean Trucks. Just to simplify this, what it will mean for Vermont is that when this regulation goes into force, between model years 2026 and 2030, Vermont will be provided with a minimum of 95,000 electric vehicles for sale, which if we replace 95,000 fossil vehicles with electric vehicles, that will be a huge contribution to reducing emissions here, about 10% of what we'll need to do by 2030. But it also, Advanced Clean Cars 2 is important beyond 2030. It sets the requirement as of 2035 that all new vehicle sales have to be zero emissions. And then I'm not going to go through all of this. This is basically the summary of the next steps that the council has committed to. These actually, this language comes directly from the executive summary of the Climate Action Plan. So I would, because I'm running short on time, I'm just going to leave that there. The slides will be shared and you can go directly to the Climate Action Plan to see this in the executive summary, our next steps. And then I'm actually going to see if I can cut and paste these into the group chat right now so that you can actually access these links. So I just posted the link to the full initial Climate Action Plan. And for folks who don't have the time or inclination to read through nearly 300 pages, here is a short summary of the plan. And I think that's it from me. I think Lauren is going to introduce Senator Balint next. Before she does, I just want to say, the Climate Action Plan is a significant milestone for Vermont. And it's been very humbling to be a part of it. It's been a huge honor and privilege. And I am very cognizant of the fact that Vermont would not be in this position with a strong climate action plan if it were not for the legislative leadership of climate champions like Senator Balint and the leadership that she and many of her colleagues showed in passing the Global Warming Solutions Act. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jared. Impressive to give such a good summary of so much information so quickly. And I see some great questions coming in. So we're going to have all of the speakers go, and then we're going to get to them. So we're capturing those. So please keep those coming so we can make sure to get to as many of your great questions as we can. And I now have the great pleasure of introducing Senate President Pro Tem Becca Balint. Senator Balint has been a longtime champion for bold climate action. Among many examples I could provide, she played an absolutely instrumental role in the ultimate enactment of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And she also played a really key role in securing historic, unprecedented commitment to climate investments this past year, where the legislature set aside at least $250 million for climate action in the coming years. So thank you for your leadership, Senator Balint, and I'm delighted to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Can you hear me okay? Are we good? Okay. So good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Becca Balint. As Lauren said, I represent Windham County and am the President Pro Tem of the Senate. And I live in Brattleboro with my spouse and 2 kids. I have a teen and a tween, and a lot of the work that I do is with them in mind. So my goal today is to share some reflections with you about perspective and how we can use our understanding of perspective to be more effective in our climate action work. I also want to talk about the kinds of work we'll be doing in the upcoming session. And finally, frankly, give you some hope that we can do meaningful work together on climate action. And I want to start with a story about my son, who is 14. And first word about my son, he looks a lot like me. It's been said since he was a toddler that he looks actually like a mini me. We have very similar eyes and chins and smiles. So I want you to imagine him or imagine me in a teenage male form as I tell you the story. So in the summer of 2020, my family went on a Vermont staycation, like a lot of people, because it was in the midst of the early days of the pandemic. And we rented a house on South Hierl. And most evenings we played Pictionary together on the back deck. And there's a night in particular that I'll never forget because it was the first time I really noticed the way that my son was building his drawings. And this simple but pretty profound observation for me has given me a lot of unexpected insight into how he sees the world and how others like him who are on the autism spectrum interpret the world. So it was his turn to draw, and his task was to draw a kitchen spatula, not the rubbery kind to scrape bowls, but the stiff kind that you use to flip pancakes. And he started his picture by drawing a tiny little circle to indicate the hole in the handle that you can use to hang it on a hook. And around the hole, he drew a handle. And next came the flat head. And he said to me, looked at me, he said, "Mom, hold on, wait for it." And then he carefully drew the slats. And as he finished the last slat, I yelled, "Spatula." And it was in some ways such an unremarkable moment. And it would have been really easy for me to miss it. But it has given me so much insight into the fact that we often have a difficult time as humans understanding that people can understand and process information differently. And this impacts their views of the world and the way that they do things and the way that they feel things should be done. So I kept thinking about this. And this insight for me got me looking at some studies about how folks with autism really interpret scenes in front of them. And I came across a study in 2018 that tracked eye movements. And it looked at neurotypical people and folks who were on the spectrum. And what we learned was where they focus their eyes, where they focus their attention, how they interpret a scene in front of them is different depending on whether you're neurotypical or somewhere on the spectrum. So this has been an incredible revelation to me, not just in understanding my son, but for me to accept that what I see as the most important or the most impactful things in any conversation or discussion might actually be more effective in a different form. So if we zoom out from this and we consider this in a really expansive way, I want us to think about, what frustrations do we each have at a family member or a community member around issues around climate change, around climate action, because they don't see things the way that we do. And how does this play out in when we try to do really meaningful work in our communities and at the legislative level around these issues? And ultimately, how can we be more effective at fighting the fact that the planet's burning? So my son's experience is a great reminder for me to remember that my view is not everyone's view. But the question is, like, how can we use this to understand the framing of this issue of climate change and climate action? Because I've been really thinking carefully about how do we get the folks, not the folks at the extreme ends of the spectrum who absolutely do not believe that climate change is real, but there's a huge swath in the middle that we can pull into the work that we're doing together. And I'll get more to that in a minute. So there's some really intriguing work that's coming out from the Yale program on climate change communication. And as we and the legislature and we out in the network, this big network of people on this Zoom, as we dive into the recommendations from the Climate Council's plan, we have to think really carefully about how we're talking about these issues with Vermonters. So two folks from the Yale team put together a framework for understanding the spectrum of beliefs related to climate change and climate action. And we often talk in this country about this intense polarization, a tale of believers and non-believers. The truth is, actually, there are 6 different Americas when it comes to ideas about climate change and climate action. 6 unique audiences, if you think about it that way, within America, within Vermont, that each responds differently to climate change in their own distinct ways. So here are the 6. So there are, and many of us on this call, I would say, fall in the first 2 categories. The first is the alarmed. Those folks are convinced that global warming is real, it's happening, it's human caused, it's an urgent threat. And they don't always know what they can do to solve the problem, but they want to help. Then there's the concerned, and they do think human action is causing global warming. They think it's a serious threat. They support climate policies, but it feels more distant to the group in the concerned grouping. They think it's a priority, but it may not be the most urgent priority before them today. Then you've got the cautious and the disengaged, 2 groups sort of in the middle. They haven't made up their minds yet. Is global warming really happening? Is it human caused? Is it as serious as people say? And then the smaller group of that middle section is the disengaged. They don't know a whole lot about it. They rarely pay attention to media stories about it. They don't quite know how to access the information on the topic. And then you've got the doubtful. They don't think global warming is happening, or if they do think it's happening, they think it's just part of a natural cycle. And then, they also think it's not really a tremendous risk to us as humans. And then, of course, the last group, the dismissive, who believe it's not happening, and many of them endorse conspiracy theories. So, Jeff, just briefly, if you looked at the folks on this Zoom, we're among the alarmed and the concerned. The alarmed are about 26% of the population, the concerned about 29% of the population. So a majority. So that's great news, majority. And then you've got another 25% in the cautious and disengaged group, and a much smaller percentage in the doubtful, dismissive, somewhere around 20%. So the good news is that there's been a significant change in the 6 Americas, or for the purposes of this call, the 6 Vermonts over the past 5 years. So the alarmed segment has grown, as has the concerned segment, and the dismissive segment has trended downward. So overall, Vermonters are becoming more worried about global warming. They're more engaged on the issue. They're more supportive of climate solutions. So that's great for us. And I want to make sure we start with a positive framing, a positive story. We're making headway, and we can continue to make more headway. So before I forget to mention it, you can go to climatecommunication.yale.edu to find out more about these frames, because I think it's just really important, fascinating work. So there's one important aspect of the work that I wanted to highlight today, because it is going to greatly impact the work that we do. So the Center at Yale identifies that there are different frames that people bring to their understanding of climate change. And the two main frames are individualism versus egalitarianism. So if you have a stronger belief in the reality of the climate emergency, you score higher on egalitarianism, a belief in community action. We're all in this together, solutions together. We can pull together, row in the same direction, and make positive change. If you have a strong belief that it is not an urgent matter, if it's not something that feels completely important and compelling to you, or if you're on the dismissive end of the spectrum, you believe that the most important thing is the individualism, my action in the world, my family's action in the world. So, and it's not often based on reality. And here's what I mean. So, it's based more on a feeling or emotions. And so, for example, my wife is from Wyoming, and Wyoming ranks 10th in the nation on a scale of the states most dependent on federal money. Okay, number 10. And on one individual metric, it ranks number 1. And that metric is the share of their state budget made up of federal funds. So they are completely dependent on federal funds, and yet they see themselves as rugged individuals. That they, they're many of the folks that I talk to when I travel out and spend time with their family, the view is individual first, community second. And so how can this apply to Vermont? What messages do we need to use to reach those folks in the middle, that middle swath of about 25% of Vermonters who are pretty evenly split between the individualism frame and the egalitarian frame, right? So when are we using messages about we're all in this together? This is better for the community. And when are we pivoting to saying, you know what? This is going to be better for you and for your kids and for your family. And so we have to be cognizant of these frames in order to be more effective. So Jared did a great job of laying out the work of the Climate Council. And as Lauren said, we are very proud in the legislature about passing the Global Warming Solutions Act, facing the governor down when he vetoed it, and pulling those votes together to override the veto. And so now we're in the next phase, right? We see all the work that the Climate Council has done, and it has been such hard work for all of those folks. And we've gotten clear directives from the council. So expanding weatherization and clean energy efficient heating options. I'm hearing from that, not just from individuals, but also from town managers reaching out to me to say, how can we get, heating pumps for town buildings? We know we have to shift away from fossil fuels. We got to build up more charging stations. We have to provide incentives for more Vermonters to get into electric vehicles. As Jared said, we also have to think really carefully about joining California and New York in the Advanced Clean Cars 2 and the Clean Trucks initiatives. That is going to make a demonstrative difference in the number of electric vehicles on the road. Something that we are keenly interested in is really incentivizing village and downtown development. We've been working on that for years within my committee in the Senate. The Economic Development and Housing Committee knows that this is a lever we absolutely have to continue to push on. And of course, looking really clearly on agricultural working lands management. How can we partner with our friends and family in the ag sector to help us in this work? And of course, as I, going back to what I was just saying, prioritizing planning and practices and investments that help Vermont communities and individuals, and helping communities and individuals and families specifically prepare for climate impacts. So as we always do in the legislature, the bulk of our work happens in committee. So I've got, I'm sure, a lot of legislators on this call right now who are eager to roll up their sleeves and do the really hard work of getting these ideas from the Climate Council translated into legislation. So we're gonna, like all of you, be digging through the recommendations of the council, be thinking about what is that punch list of things that we can get done this session, and what is the arc of this work over the next few years, especially as we have several years to spend the federal funds that came from the American Rescue Plan. And as I know everyone who had a hand in writing the initial climate report knows, we are going to be doing this work with the charges of equity and urgency riding side by side. So the speaker and I, we've toured the state, hundreds and hundreds of Vermonters we've talked to, talking about investments from the American Rescue Plan dollars. And what we heard was that people want incredible investments in housing, in workforce, in climate change, and transportation. Those ideas were consistently at the top of the list of priorities that we heard from Vermonters across Vermont. So this is going to guide our work this session. And, I want to just tell you, we don't have time to get despondent and discouraged. We just don't. And we have to absolutely believe that change is possible. And those numbers that I referred to earlier about the number of Americans and Vermonters who have shifted their ideas and thinking on climate change, like that is a noticeable difference. That is a shift. That is a change. It's happened over the last 5 years. So we have to believe that change is possible in order for us to continue to do this critical work together. And I truly believe heading into this session, we have the wind at our backs. Public sentiment is with us. Let's make this upcoming session the best we've ever seen on climate action. And I really look forward to the discussion part of this panel so we can get down in the nitty-gritty of what you all would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Balint. Great framing, important perspectives of where we go from here, and really look forward to continue to working with you to make the most of the upcoming session. Next, I'm really grateful to be joined by Camila Thorndike and Ethan Hinch from Senator Bernie Sanders' office. I had the pleasure of working with Camila on a climate campaign here in Vermont a few years ago, and she is a great strategic thinker, and we're really lucky to have her as an ally in Senator Sanders' office now. And Ethan Hinch grew up in Vermont, has great local perspective, and has also been a great partner, always keeping us updated and engaged as Senator Sanders continues to play this really central role nationally in pushing for ambitious climate action. So thank you so much for joining us today, and take it away, Camila and Ethan.
Hi, all. Thank you for having us here today. And thank you to everyone who's spoken so far. We're here to talk about two pretty significant pieces of legislation that we're working on in Congress. We're going to start with the first one, which we've already passed, which was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, which was really one of the most significant infrastructure bills since the creation of the interstate highway system in the 1950s. It's about $1.2 trillion. About half of that is new. It's going to make critically overdue investments in our roads, bridges, and water systems, as well as increase access to affordable and reliable internet, improve resiliency against climate change, reduce our transportation system's greenhouse gas emissions, and create a lot of good paying jobs. In terms of the broad buckets of funding within the bill, it's got about $250 billion nationally for roads. It's got about $7.5 billion for electric vehicle chargers. It's got about $55 billion for drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, which includes $15 billion to replace lead service lines. It's got a total of about $50 billion for a broad range of resiliency activities, including cybersecurity, waste management, wildfire mitigation. And then it's got about $23 billion to clean up pollution, including brownfield sites, Superfund sites, and orphaned oil and gas wells. Now, as a senior member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, Senator Sanders fought very hard to make sure Vermont got its fair share of funding from this bill. As a result, our state is expected to receive at least $2.2 billion just in formula funding alone, which is one of the largest infusions of federal money into our state in history. Again, very broadly, over the next 5 years, Vermont's going to get at least $1.4 billion in highway program funding, $225 million in bridge replacement repairs, $21 million to expand the state's electric vehicle charging network, $77 million to improve and expand public transportation, $100 million to deploy advanced broadband, about $355 million to improve drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, about $40 million specifically for Lake Champlain water quality projects, $12 million for cyber attack resiliency, and $6 million to protect against wildfires. And all that is just the formula funding, and it also contains over the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, I should say, also contains over $100 billion in competitive grant funding, which can go to states, towns, and some private entities. Our office and Senator Sanders is going to be providing more information to a broad array of Vermont groups, towns in the state on these grant programs to help Vermonters be as competitive as possible and to be able to get as much of this money as possible over the lifetime of the bill. Some of the specific provisions in the bill that are going to be really crucial in Vermont are the Weatherization Assistance Program. There's $3.5 billion in there. We all know how important weatherization is, especially in a cold climate. The $10 billion in there for PFAS cleanup, $5 billion of that, half is going to be distributed to the EPA's Small and Disadvantaged Communities Drinking Water Grant Program, again, which makes Vermont more competitive when applying or when receiving those dollars. There's a $550 million infusion into the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program, which helps states and towns fund energy efficiency improvements. There's $5 billion, which can go to states, towns, and utilities to improve resiliency and reliability in our electric grid. And then there's an additional $4 billion for smart grid improvements. That can also go to a broad array of entities. So now that we've passed this bill, our office has two jobs next. Camila's going to talk about the next one. But in regards to the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, we want to make sure that this funding gets out the door quickly and in an efficient manner, and that Vermont is as competitive as possible when applying for these dollars. So we look forward to working with all of you on that, and I'm going to pass it over to Camila.
Great. Thanks so much, Ethan, and thanks to everyone hosting this wonderful event. It's great to be back in touch with Vermont because of everything going on in the Senate this year. Haven't gotten the chance to spend the summer in Vermont that I was looking forward to. So hopefully next year, when we are dispersing all the great funds and good work from this bill to our state. So I'm going to review the Build Back Better Act, which is the big climate and social spending piece of legislation that would not be happening without Senator Sanders' leadership. A couple of weeks ago, the House passed the bill, and this is really an incredible step towards fulfilling Senator Sanders' vision for a country where the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes, where we rein in corporate greed, where we ensure that everyday Americans can actually afford the essentials of life, healthcare, our homes, education, and most important to our shared work here in this circle, it also represents the single largest effort in American history to fight climate change and transition to clean energy. Senator Schumer's goal is to pass it in our chamber by Christmas. So we're all looking forward to a very busy holiday. And for the past, I guess now 8 months, our team has been really hard at work shaping this bill to be as forward-looking and really make sure that it benefits everyday folks and Vermont in particular in a way that's really tangible, that you can feel and notice the difference in our lives and communities. And so that's where I'm going to focus my comments here is how this will actually change lives in a felt way. the kind of broad highlights of the Build Back Better Act, which is now a $1.75 trillion bill with $555 billion for climate and clean energy, include consumer rebates and tax credits to reduce the costs for folks to shift to clean energy and electrify our homes and workplaces. It ensures that clean energy technology, whether that's wind turbine blades or solar panels or electric cars, will be built in the United States with American-made steel and other materials, and create and keep those good jobs here in our country. It advances environmental justice through initiatives like the new Clean Energy and Sustainability Accelerator, which includes $7 billion for solar for rooftops and communities that would not be happening without Senator Sanders' leadership. And it also bolsters resilience and natural solutions to climate change through investments in coastal restoration and forest management and soil conservation. So now kind of breaking that down further into what this really means, I'm going to go over transportation, clean energy, healthy buildings, manufacturing, and regenerative agriculture, which is not all of the portions of the climate and clean energy bucket, but ones that I think are most important for our state. So in terms of transportation, and the numbers that I'm going to lay out, aren't specific to Vermont. These are nationwide estimates. Once the final legislation is down to implementation mode, once we've passed it, then our state agencies will be able to determine through whether the grants for this funding is competitive or based on tax credits, which are much more through individual taxpayers and businesses, right? The money's going to flow in a lot of different ways. So it's hard to estimate exactly how much will go to Vermont, but I'll give you a big picture. So on transportation, more than 60,000 diesel school buses will be converted to clean so that our kids are not inhaling toxins on their way to school. It'll cut the price of an electric vehicle by $12,500 for middle-class families, while again supporting electric vehicle manufacturing at unionized U.S. factories. We hope to retain that part of the bill. It'll help build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations, convert 70% of the Postal Service mail truck fleet to electric vehicles, build new high-speed rail lines, cut the price of an electric bike by $900, and boosting benefits that employers offer for biking to work. And on clean energy and electricity, it'll help an average family save about $500 each year in utility bills. It'll double the speed of wind and solar power expansion. So millions of additional homes every year will be able to be powered by clean energy. It'll make it about $7,000 cheaper to install solar panels on your roof. It'll boost access to renewable energy in low-income and indigenous communities by covering about 40 to 50% of the cost of solar and wind projects. It'll make it easier for churches and hospitals and schools and local governments and nonprofits to install wind and solar by cutting about 30% of the cost of those installations. And it'll make the grid more reliable, as we've seen disasters from Texas to California and Vermont lead to increasing numbers of rolling, black and brownouts as climate impacts worsen. In the healthy buildings category, it'll enable working families to save up to $8,000 while weatherizing your homes to reduce your bills and pollution. It'll make it about $10,000 cheaper to convert your home from fossil fuel-based to electricity-based heating and cooling to slash, again, pollution in our lungs and in the atmosphere. It'll upgrade living conditions for about 800,000 people who live in public housing, cutting energy costs and offering protection from the storms, flooding, extreme weather that we're seeing. And in terms of clean manufacturing, one highlight is creating about 150,000 family-sustaining jobs by establishing and retooling factories that manufacture vehicles and clean energy components. And getting down to the bottom of this exciting list, we've got agriculture being seeing some significant transformation as well. About 60,000 farmers will be able to switch to renewable energy and machinery that uses less energy. And it'll support the efforts of more than 200,000 farmers to protect soils, so we can increase our harvests, reduce the impacts of drought and events, extreme events, and trap more climate pollution. And last but not least, our office has also played a huge role in Civilian Climate Corps, with about 300,000 new positions that will be created at AmeriCorps for young folks and a whole generation that wants to get to work fighting the climate crisis in our communities, in our forests, on our waterways, and it'll increase the amount that those folks are making to a livable wage. So I can go into a lot more detail on any of one of those areas, but I'll say it's been a really exciting ride, and we are eager to get to the finish line.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That's incredibly helpful. And I know a lot of people are asking for like whatever summaries, if there's fact sheets or anything that you can provide. So we'll do our best to follow up and get folks links to those kinds of resources. And there's been a bunch of really great links put into the chat so far. So I think now we're at the Q&A. We've got a good 20 plus minutes. So we've gotten a lot of really good questions and we've got time to go through them. So we'll get to as many as we can. And great, we've got all of our panelists back, yay. So I'm gonna just start at the top. And so we've been capturing them kind of speaker by speaker. So if they are a little clumped to our panelists, that's how they've come in. So the first question, well, we had one about weatherization, but thanks for putting some information about that into the comment box, Jared. So hopefully that was answered, but you can repost if you had further questions about weatherization you wanted to talk about. One was, I'd be grateful if Jared would talk about Hydro-Quebec and how Vermont is calling this clean energy. What about the methane released? So basically, can you just tell us more about how Hydro-Quebec is being considered in the Climate Action Plan or Comprehensive Energy Plan, or however you can speak to it, Jared, and then if others want to jump in on that. But we had a few questions and some conversation going about how Hydro-Quebec is being considered.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Good and important question, Stephanie. Thank you for posing it. Right now, the way that the state greenhouse gas inventory is conducted is looking at, and this is the way most state inventories and national inventories are done, is looking at the emissions that occur from what's called site energy use, or at the point of production, or the burner tip in the case of other sources of energy. And so hydro, in terms of at the site where that electricity kind of enters the grid, is considered by Vermont, at least the Agency of Natural Resources right now, as a zero carbon resource. Now, of course, you're right that there are upstream or sometimes life cycle emissions associated with all of our energy use, not just hydro, also natural gas, also other fossil fuels, also other forms of electricity generation. Those are much more complicated to assess. But what we have committed to as a climate council is that we are going to issue a request for information, an RFI, that will have scientific experts help us begin to assess the upstream or life cycle emissions impact of all of our energy use, which is spoken to in the Global Warming Solutions Act. So it's an important question. There's further research that's going to happen there. I will say that wearing my EAN hat rather than my Climate Council hat, we have begun to look into that question. And even when you apply, even if you took the life cycle emissions factors of Hydro-Quebec from the latest peer-reviewed science, they are still far, far lower than any of the fossil resources or from the ISO New England grid mix. And so it would be inappropriate to do this because it would be an apples to oranges comparison. But even if you took the life cycle emissions from Hydro-Quebec that have been estimated and applied them to Vermont's electricity sector emissions, the overall electricity sector emissions would go up from about 2% of our total to about 2.25% of our total. So I 100% agree that it's important that we have transparent, accurate, holistic accounting on all of these questions. But I also think that we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of the biggest problem when it comes to climate pollution, which is all of the gasoline and diesel and fuel oil and propane and natural gas and coal and the fossil fuels that are primarily driving this, especially because hydro is uniquely important as a base load or firm power resource. And if not hydro, beyond the intermittent sources of solar and wind, then oftentimes what would the alternative would be equally, if not more problematic in terms of natural gas baseload generation or nuclear. So I think that we just need to take all those factors into account and look at it transparently and carefully.
Thank you, Jared. All right, another question. I'm going to maybe have Senator Balint start us off with this, and then Jared, if you want to add any detail, that would be great. But does the climate action plan need to be implemented with specific legislation in the coming session, or how exactly do we anticipate it will be implemented?
So there are certainly parts of the climate plan that are going to need legislative work, statutory language that will have to get through committees of jurisdiction. But there are also some places specifically related to the federal funding, the ARPA funds, that are in some ways a much more straightforward commitment of dollars through the appropriations process. Still needs to go through the legislative process. I know Jared is much more familiar with some of the details that are coming out of the plan. There may be things that you know, Jared, that don't require legislative action. I am myself curious about those things because I know we have quite a bit on our plate that we're going to be doing around weatherization at scale. And certainly we've had our punch list for years that we're working on, but where do you see those places where you'd actually, because sometimes people say it's better if you don't get the legislature involved because it just is a slow process. We all know that. So curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I'd say I'm still trying to learn and figure that out. And if Johanna or others who've been involved have additional, I actually am not 100% sure the extent to which legislation in part is necessary for the Advanced Clean Cars rule, or whether that can just be done directly through rulemaking by the Agency of Natural Resources. My assumption has been that it's the latter, that can proceed directly through rulemaking, although there may need to be some legislative action. That's the one that feels, as we've discussed it, that it seems the most kind of agency-based. A number of others, I think, could eventually end up under the jurisdiction of the Agency of Natural Resources, the Public Utilities Commission, the Public Service Department, but likely need authorizing legislation first, for instance, to authorize development of a clean heat standard, or the funding mechanisms for weatherization at scale, or authorizing Vermont to be able to receive and then outline the process for expending any revenue from a cap and invest program, whether that was the Transportation and Climate Initiative or something else. So that's a few initial thoughts. Sorry, I don't have more answers yet. I think we're going to be doing more digging and research as we go.
Exactly. And, I was meeting with Joint Fiscal Office the other day, just specifically about housing and all the different streams of money coming around housing and how we get a handle on the issue of weatherization at scale while also trying to build more houses. So we are, all of us, diving into the details over the next few weeks and months. And, I think I mentioned this in my talk, but I just want everybody to be clear that the dollars that we have available to us through the ARPA funds do not all need to be spent this year. And so we have a long runway in which to invest really, really carefully and wisely. And that is a relief, because the coronavirus relief funds, we had an incredibly quick turnaround. And if we had known we'd had a little bit more time, we might have made some other choices. So.
Great. Thank you both for that. And definitely stay tuned, everyone. And we'll all be doing our best to let you know different ways that you can plug into administrative and legislative pushes to make sure that we're moving quickly and effectively on the climate action plan. And one piece that has come up a lot is the ongoing engagement and need for additional public input. Was curious, and maybe this is to Jared, do you know yet of plans for roadshow or outreach events for the climate action plan, going around the state? Is that clear yet, or is that still being kind of figured out? Was it just get the plan out and then and then figure out the next phase?
Yeah, I think the intent and commitment is very strong and is very clear. We don't yet have all the details about kind of dates, locations, webinars, things like that. But so I think the short answer is yes, but please stay tuned.
Lauren, if I could jump in here too, I think the model that the speaker and I have used around the state for engaging not just communities, but also individual Vermonters and organizations is a good one, because we've been able to talk to a lot of Vermonters who wouldn't necessarily tend to show up at an event such as this or others like it. So we used a lot of, here are the people who are engaged right now. Who do you think needs to be part of this conversation that isn't here? And then those led to other conversations and other conversations. And so that organic way of pulling people in, both being, focused and clear on who you need at the table, but also being open to the fact that there are other people you may not be thinking of. And so you have to be flexible in the way that you do public engagement. And I think something that we've learned from the work that we've done in the legislature during this entire pandemic is that when we give people more options for how to engage, we get more Vermonters engaged in the process of government. So that's exciting.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right, let's get Camila and Ethan in here. One question we've gotten a couple times is, do you anticipate that the Senate will put a price on carbon in the Build Back Better bill, or are there any mechanisms like that that are worth going into for folks?
Camila, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. Well, I cut my teeth in this work on carbon tax advocacy, so trust me, I'm a believer. I don't think that we're going to see by the books kind of carbon price in this bill. As you all are probably aware, the math of our vote count in the Senate is dicey, and there's limited opportunities to hold polluters directly accountable. We are seeing some versions of that. I'd say reinstating the Superfund, for instance, is a really exciting example of directly taxing crude oil imports, chemicals, and then using the funds for cleanup of the disasters they create for communities that are most impacted. I know there's like 14 Superfund sites in Vermont, and some of the funding will flow there for cleanup. And there's a form of indirect carbon pricing in the sense that we're readjusting the tax code to benefit clean energy that will displace fossil fuels. And trying to think of what else is a kind of encouraging sign there. It'll hopefully do a great deal to shift the kind of political economy of this country so that we can build the strength on our collective side of the fight to take on the source of pollution in a much bigger way. Build some momentum. Ethan, do you want to add to that?
I think you covered it very well.
Thank you for that. All right, how about this one directed to Jared? Could you speak a little bit more about the thermal sector workforce development needs and what's the state of, I know EAN has been doing some work on that, and whatever's coming out of the climate action plan and hopefully headed to the legislature. Would love an update on that.
Yeah, I just saw that Sarah actually posted in the chat the link, and I'll actually get the actual web link unless someone beats me to it and post it in there about some research that was done by Raquel Smith, who was a phenomenal EAN intern this summer, looking at some of those questions. A lot of that initial research has been picked up thanks to the leadership of folks like Representative Gabrielle Stebbins and Dylan Giambattista at VGS. There's a working group that has been developed on building our climate workforce that is getting started, that there's more information about on the EAN website. And of course, the ongoing Weatherization at Scale working group is also very much focused on this. Efficiency Vermont is doing some studies related to workforce development. There's a lot of kind of coordination that is going into kind of the level of investment, training, support for workforce that'll be necessary to scale up those efforts. But I will try to find some of those links and put them in. Thank you, Ethan.
Great, thank you. One I'm going to direct to Senator Balint, kind of building on your talk about communications. Someone was asking about, a lot of detractors, a key point they go to is how even if Vermont gets to zero emissions, it doesn't change the global trajectory. So this person was looking for some suggestions, and I know this comes up a lot for a lot of us in different conversations. So how do you respond to that, and how do you make the case for?
Yeah. Oh, Lauren, it's such a good question, and one that I'm still trying to sort out for myself. I know for me, I tend to have the most effective communications with people when I bring it back to their personal experiences of climate change, and to try to steer away from that argument about, are we having any impact? Because we all know that collective impact starts small and then it grows. And we see this across the political spectrum on a whole variety of issues. So just to bring it home here, we had a terrible deluge of water this summer in southern Vermont. Many parts of Vermont were in a drought. We were not in a drought. And every severe storm that we had, my constituents had homes, damaged, property washed away. Certainly the low-lying areas in Windham County, which tend to be people with fewer resources, a lot of our mobile home residences. And so to always go directly to what has been your experience living here for the last 5 or 10 years? Have you seen, the weather changing? Have you experienced it in your pocketbook? Have you had to do more work on your home or your property? Or like in the case of, Irene down here, I had friends who had their cars washed away in the stream. These are not conversations that can happen as a one-off, right? You have to sort of keep circling around to, is this the kind of experience you remember 5 or 10 years ago? And bringing it back to, so in Vermont, so many of us have ties to our local farmers and agriculture. And, to what extent have you been talking with your local farmer about how it's impacting their growing season, what they're able to grow or not grow? And these are very big investments of time and energy with our neighbors and having these conversations. I wish I could tell you I had a very successful means of pivoting away from that particular question of like, what difference does it make? And it is, I try to bring it back to my experience too of, so as an openly gay woman, the only openly queer person ever to be elected as a leader in the Vermont State Senate, within the first few months of moving to Vermont, I had, you know, a homophobic epitaph scratched into the side of my car with a key and had to have my car repainted. I could easily say that there's nothing that I can do to connect with that neighbor who might have done that, or the people who are showing up in that way. But I absolutely see it in my own life that when you keep re-engaging with people, more often they will start to turn towards you and not away from you, even on really difficult issues like climate change. And I almost mention it every single time I'm asked to talk to VECAN, which is, if you don't know the work of Catherine Hayhoe, you have got to follow her. And she has a really great podcast that she did in the last couple months with the On Being podcast and Krista Tippett. And I highly recommend it. 51 minutes of your time, but it is about that. How do you engage people who really come in with a particular talking point? And for those of you who don't know, she's an evangelical Christian and has a lot of really meaningful conversations with people who don't believe in climate change. So she is one of my heroes. So I hope that's helpful, but I welcome any additional input from everyone on this call, because this is work we have to take on directly.
If it's all right, Lauren, I just want to add a few thoughts to that. I totally agree with you, Senator Balint, and I'm going to follow your lead of the kind of the talking in the context of we're in this together, and on the kind of what does it mean in terms of individualism side.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of we're in this together, the response of there's a global climate crisis, Vermont's a small state, we shouldn't do anything, to me is so, it goes so against Vermont's character and history of leadership. You know, I just think about throughout our history, when the Civil War happened, we didn't say, well, we're not going to send any troops. We had the highest per capita contributions in the Civil War. When you know, it was clear that LGBTQ Vermonters did not have the same rights as others, we didn't say, well, we're going to let other states lead. We were the first state in the country that passed, that's legislature passed civil unions. So this idea that we should like bury our heads in the sand or wait for others, I think just goes so much against our character and our history as a state. I also just think that we can't make progress if everybody starts with that response. We all have a responsibility, and this only works if every state, every country steps up and leads. And I think that that's a profound, very deep moral responsibility collectively. On the individual level, I'd say that Vermont is uniquely poised to benefit Vermont and Vermonters from this transition for two reasons. One, 100% of the fossil fuel that we use in Vermont is imported. That creates a major drain on the state economy. And when we invest in weatherization and we switch to using electricity or local sustainable wood, it keeps far more of our dollars recirculating locally. So even if it's just the individual perspective of wanting, you know, more job opportunities or wanting to see Vermont's economy strengthen, that is very clearly can happen in this transition if we follow things like the recommendations in the Climate Action Plan. But even more directly for consumers, one of the things that I could not get my head around was the rationale that the governors of Connecticut and Massachusetts used to oppose joining the Transportation and Climate Initiative was the high cost of gasoline and diesel. So their solution was to not do anything about it. Their solution was, we're going to pull out of TCI, which is a program that is designed to help get off of those high cost and price volatile fuels so that we can move to more affordable, cleaner alternatives for folks in an equitable way. And so, you know, to me, so much of this is, yes, we've seen a 60% increase in the price of gas in the last year, up over $1 a gallon. It is so short-sighted and irresponsible to throw our hands up and say, well, we're not going to pursue policies that would change that status quo, because that fossil-fueled status quo is an incredible burden on Vermonters, especially our lowest income neighbors and friends and family.
Thank you for that. Well said, both of you. Next, I wanted to ask Camila and Ethan, can you speak to how The infrastructure bill and/or Build Back Better Act prioritizes equitable infrastructure investments such as electric vehicle charging infrastructure, or just in general, how the federal conversation and programs are centering equity?
So I'll start with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. To be transparent, a lot of that money in that bill is in the form of formula grants to states, which the amounts by which are determined by pre-existing factors. Those formulas were not heavily modified by the act, so it will be on states to determine how to distribute a lot of that money within the scope of the intended purpose. So, the Vermont state government will have some leeway in deciding what projects to spend that money on and where they want to spend it. In terms of the competitive grant programs, many of them do have a focus on rural, remote, and disadvantaged communities, which again is sometimes defined, sometimes not. It's often up to the secretaries or leaders of the various agencies to decide exactly how to define those terms and how to set up the grant program. So we have a lot of work to do going forward to make sure that they are distributing those funds in an equitable manner. That work was not finished when we signed the bill.
Yeah, I can see. Oh, sorry. Is there echo for you all? Okay, there we go. For the Build Back Better Act, much of the equity provisions come in the form of bonuses for the clean energy tax credits in particular. If you are building at a commercial or larger scale in a low income or indigenous or kind of energy transition community, there's sometimes upwards of 20% boosted credit, low income housing as well. And then there's additional benefits for things like used EVs to serve folks who can't afford a brand new Tesla, which is the vast majority of us. And there's also targeted investments through the Clean Energy Sustainability Accelerator for communities sort of broadly defined. That might be a certain kind of census tract, or again, defined by historic disinvestment from reconnecting communities that have been sort of torn apart by the previous era of highway building or have suffered from legacy pollution. And then there's additional benefits in the housing space for affordable housing, manufactured homes that are going to be Energy Star compliant. It's sort of woven throughout, and the Justice 40 initiative from the White House kind of throughout this bill will also ensure that the funds, once implemented, go to benefit 40% of those benefits rather will flow to disadvantaged and most impacted communities in the country.
Thank you for that. And my cat Hazel has decided to join us all this morning. So I know we just have a few minutes left, and there's so many great important questions, and including one from our great Senator Mark McDonald, who is on the line with us, who of course is on the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee and will be a key player, as he always is, in advancing climate action. I want to make sure that we have time for something that I'm hoping all of the panelists can speak to, of just a broader question about, so on the line with us today, we have leaders in communities across the state who are part of their energy committees. And between the federal funding opportunities, the advancing the climate action plan, would love for each of you to just offer some suggestions of how these community leaders who are with us today can be helping their local communities benefit from these dollars and help us all keep pushing in the same direction for progress on the climate action plan. So I don't know if one of you wants to raise your hand to start first. Great, thank you, Senator. You're muted.
Thank you, Lauren. Every municipality in Vermont is also getting direct funding through ARPA, which was really different than what happened for the coronavirus relief funds. And so it's really important that you're engaging with your local select board, your town managers, to talk about how are you planning to spend that money that is targeted directly to towns and cities and villages. Because bottom line, any change that you want to do related to climate change work, you're going to need more technical assistance probably. You want to make sure that your towns are thinking about that proactively and making sure that there's money available locally for you to be able to implement the kind of plans that you want to implement at the local level. So just more of a technical thing. I want people to know those funds are available. Be asking about what the plans are for your towns and cities.
I can speak briefly next on this. First of all, I want to say if anyone has questions about these federal grant programs that are created or like help accessing them, please don't hesitate to reach out to our office. We have staff who are very experienced with applying for these grant programs, and it is possible for our office to write letters of recommendation for Vermont organizations that are applying for federal grants. So we're happy to help. If you have specific questions, please just reach out. And I'll say I also have a section by section of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. I don't have it online, so I think we can find a way to email that around afterwards. I'd recommend reading that and just seeing what the individual programs look like, so you can identify which ones you might want to apply for, and start preparing that as early as possible. It's difficult to say exactly when the funds will become available to the state and then subsequently or directly to other smaller organizations and entities. But having your ducks in a row in terms of what the grant criteria are will be enormously helpful in making you competitive for those funds.
Jared or Camila, anything to add?
Those were great. No, I'm good now.
Awesome. So, well, we have hit our timing, and really, again, just so grateful to all of the panelists for joining us and to everyone who is tuning in today. Such great content you all provided on our climate action plan, on what to expect in the legislature, on the federal funding opportunities. And again, I think this really confluence of opportunities that we have before us with so much momentum in Vermont and what's coming federally, it's really exciting. And this crowd has been working so hard for so long. So, really excited to work with all of you to make the most of it. Senator Balint, do you want to say one last thing?
Yeah, I just, it's that time of year where everybody's thinking about sending out their holiday cards. And what I want to say is perhaps instead of sending traditional holiday cards, you could look at all of the members of, your climate council that has put in hundreds and hundreds of hours and feel pretty tired, weary, trying not to get discouraged. I think it would mean a tremendous amount if you set aside some time to drop those folks an email or a card thanking them for their service, because it's been a tremendous service to the state of Vermont. Thanks, Lauren.
That is such a great addition. It's so true. The amount of hours, dedication, just heart that went into the plan is really incredible. And, I think trying to break new ground on how we're addressing equity issues has been, both hard and, of course, critically important and so much more work to do. But just the conversation that we had were incredible. And, just thank you for all of you who are on the call today, who are part of the Climate Council. And that is such a great suggestion. So let's wrap up there. I know we've got to transition to the next portion of this. Thank you all again. Have a great day and great to be with you.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Jared, Senator Balint, Camila, and Ethan for your updates, your perspective, and your insights on these really important matters. This potentially transformational moment in time. That was such a great way to wrap it up. And thank you, Lauren, for facilitating this dialogue.